great introduction. Pleasure to be here. Good morning to all attendants. It's a great pleasure to be able to present today on the EU policy update. As Dragomir already said, I will be talking a bit about relevant provisions in the EPBD recast, but I'll also share a bit about the broader EU policy context. A lot of the time, I will just immediately start. So when we say EU policy context, what are we talking about? Because there is quite a broad number of policy files available, and these are coming in different forms and shapes. So we have directives, regulations, communications, and specific funding programs. And in this presentation, I'll specifically focus on directives. The Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive particularly. But it doesn't mean that this is where it stops. Actually, there's also the Renewable Energy Directive, the Waste Framework Directive. When we talk about regulations, the EU Taxonomy Regulation, the Construction Product Regulation, the European Climate Law, the Renovation Wave Strategy Communication, the EU Heating and Cooling Strategy, Repower EU. In other words, there is a lot. I have selected the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive because there are specific aspects of these directives that apply or that are specifically relevant for public authorities. The EPBD recast has very recently been approved by the European Council, and before that in March by the European Parliament, which means that the EPBD recast will be included in the European Journal around the summer, and then member states will have 2 years' time to implement this directive. So around mid-2026, all member states should have transposed the EPBD, and around 2027, a new revision cycle will start. That means that in the coming 2 years, member states will have to work on the contents of this EPBD directive. What is in the EPBD? You see here an image of different articles that are included in the EPBD, and in this presentation, I'll not focus on these 5 of them. These are the National Building Renovation Plans, Minimum Energy Performance Standards and Progressive Renovation Trajectories, Zero Emission Buildings, Renovation Passports, and the articles surrounding EPCs. And this is obviously relevant because IB Road to EPC focuses on building renovation passports and energy performance certificates and linking these. So what does the EPBD say about renovation passports and deep renovations and states renovations? Because that's very relevant in the context of building renovation passports and IB Road to EPC. So the EPBD says a renovation passport means a tailored roadmap for a deep renovation of a specific building in a maximum number of steps that will significantly improve its energy performance. A deep renovation means a renovation which is in line with the energy efficiency first principle, which focuses on essential building elements and which transforms a building unit into a nearly zero energy building until 2030 and a zero emission building from 2030 onwards. That's the goal. And a staged renovation is a deep renovation carried out in a maximum number of steps as set out in a renovation passport. So here we have a couple of terms that already show the relevance of the IB Road to EPC project in guiding one way forward of implementing and transposing the EPBD recast. And what we see here is that there are certain synergies between EPCs and building renovation passports. In particular, as regards the assessment of the current performance of the buildings and the recommendation for its improvement. And member states should be able to allow the renovation passport and the energy performance certificate to be drawn up jointly by the same expert and issued together. So this has implications for the experts that will be generating the building renovation passports, and for member states setting up new renovation passport schemes when these do not exist yet. And renovation passport should substitute the recommendations of energy performance certificates if they are drawn up together. So this shows that in the EPBD there are clear indications for renovation passports that have to be transposed. Now, this in itself is interesting, but for public authorities in general, there are broader responsibilities, and the national building renovation plans are an example of such responsibility on national level. So these national building renovation plans set out long-term and intermediate goals for building stock transformation. These strategies provide statistics on the building stock, but also, and that's very important, provide an overview of planned and implemented policies to achieve the transformation. This includes financing measures, but it also includes different aspects related to technical implementation, like building renovation passports, energy performance certificates, funding, training, capacity building, etc. These national building renovation plans are based on a harmonized template to ensure comparability of the plans, and these can be found in Annex 2 of the EPBD recast. And the first draft building renovation plan is to be submitted by the Commission already on 31 December 2025. So that's basically in a bit more than 1.5 years. And then the first final plan after comments of the Commission should be handed in by the end of 2026. Afterwards, there is a revision cycle of every 5 years. And these MBRPs will be submitted as part of the integrated national energy and climate plans, and they need to include roadmaps for phasing out fossil fuels and heating and cooling. So what we can see here is that member states will have to draw up plans in order to transform the building stock towards the goals of, basically a zero emission building stock in 2050. And obviously, this is a source for national authorities. This is a responsibility to draw these plans up. For local authorities, it will be also a summary of all the different plans that are available on national level. Then there is the zero emission building standard. So this is relevant specifically also for IB Road to EPC because it sets out the direction of where we should go for individual buildings and for building renovation passports. And what is a zero emission building? It means a building with a very high energy performance requiring zero or a very low amount of energy, producing zero on-site carbon emissions from fossil fuels, and zero or very low amount of operational greenhouse gas emissions. So these standards will replace the previous nearly zero energy standards in 2030. And the standard will enter into force already in 2028 for all new buildings owned by public bodies and on the 1st of January 2030 for all new buildings. So what we see here is that there is specific responsibilities for public authorities to lead by example. Member states shall ensure that the total amount of primary energy use of new or renovated ZEP is covered by energy from renewable sources on site or renewable energy communities or energy from an efficient district heating system. So it shows that the ZEP standard applies to new and renovated buildings as well, and that it indicates which energy sources can be used in order to ensure that buildings stay warm and that they have access to energy. Renovation passports. So those aware with IB Road to EPC and the predecessor IB Road understand that building renovation passports are an important tool to decarbonize individual buildings. And as set out in the EPBD recast, a building renovation passport means a tailored roadmap for the deep renovation of a specific building in a maximum number of steps that will significantly improve the energy. So it's important here to see that all member states will have to implement a voluntary scheme. So they must implement a scheme, but it should be voluntary in use for building owners unless member states decide to make it mandatory. So that shows there's certain leeway for member states to, well, design a system and make it a requirement or not. Member states may decide to allow for the renovation passport to be drawn up and issued jointly with energy performance certificates, what we already previously saw. And the member states need to ensure that these passports can be uploaded to the national databases for energy performance of buildings and accessed via digital building logbook. So this is very important because it's essential that different information tools for buildings are linked together. So we have digital building logbooks, we have building renovation passports, we have energy performance certificates, we have one-stop shops. And to really pick the fruits of all these different tools, it's great if they're linked together and that the data can be exchanged. In the EPBD recast, there's an annex that set out a list of requirements for the renovation passport and suggestions for optional features. I will look at that in the next slide. And another important aspect to keep in mind when we talk about digital aspects of BRP is that there should be a digital tool for preparing and potentially updating the renovation passports. For example, after a renovation measure has been implemented. So when we look at the mandatory and the optional design features of building renovation passport schemes in the EPBD recast, we see the following. So on the top side, you see the mandatory features, and on the bottom side, you see the optional features. I will now only focus on the mandatory features in light of the time, but I trust that the colleagues will share these slides so that you can have a look at it afterwards in peace. But what should be in the BRP? Voluntary schemes that are implemented on national level, the current energy performance of the buildings, of course, as a starting point, a graphical roadmap with renovation steps, information on national requirements, for example, minimum energy performance standards or the phase out of fossil boilers. But this shows that this tool will also highlight and will be a tool to support compliance with policy goals. Explanation of sequencing of the best step, and then for each step a set of information, for example, the name and description of the measures, estimated energy savings and reduction of operational carbon emissions, estimated savings on the energy bill, and an estimated EPC class after completion. Now, moreover, information on the possible connections to district heating system and cooling should be provided. The share of individual or collected generation of renewable energy after the renovation, information on improving the construction product circularity, but also life cycle global warming potential if this information is available, and information available on funding. So you see that the Building Renovation Passport is foreseen as a tool that really brings together different types of information in a very understandable format for building owners. And that's very useful for public authorities that own buildings and that need to renovate them. But it's also very useful for all types of other building owners on national level and local level. So minimum energy performance standards have been a hot topic in EU debates over the last year. And initially it was foreseen that these would apply to all, but now we see that there's a difference made between residential and non-residential buildings. So minimum energy performance standards will apply to non-residential buildings and progressive renovation trajectories for renovation buildings or for residential buildings. The goal of MAPS is to ensure that non-residential buildings do not exceed specified maximum energy performance thresholds. And these are foreseen to really increase the low renovation rates that we currently see in Europe. So it's sort of a way to obligate building owners to actually start renovating their buildings if they have a very bad performance. So MAPS will ensure that all non-residential buildings are below specific maximum performance thresholds. That means that there's a threshold defined in 2030 for 16% of buildings. That means that in the baseline year of 2020, they say that which 16% of the building stock are worst performing, and that these buildings basically that the threshold is set at that point, and in 2030 all buildings need to be below that threshold. And for 2033 there's a threshold set at 26% of the building stock, and basically that means that in 2033 all the buildings need to be below this threshold compared to 2020. Now this is all rather complicated and it's not very clear. What does it mean 2026? How do member states actually set these kind of thresholds? And I know that currently the European Commission is preparing technical guidance for all the member states and that they are in touch with national ministries to clarify these kind of questions and to bring out a guidance for member states to be able to set such thresholds. When we're looking at trajectories for progressive renovation of residential buildings, a different approach is taken. So here, member states must achieve a decrease of average primary energy use in kilowatt hours per square meter of the entire building stock compared to 2020. So we don't look at individual buildings, but we look at the stock level. The average primary energy use should be decreased by 16% in 2030 and then 20 to 22% by 2035 for residential buildings. And here the Commission and the European institutions, the Council and the Parliament have recognized the importance to really tackle the worst performing buildings because these buildings are basically leaking and a lot of energy gets lost there. So 55% of this average primary energy use decrease should be achieved among 43% of the worst performing buildings. Again, it's clear that there is several percentages being named here, and I can only reiterate that the Commission is preparing a guidance for member states to actually define these values. Takeaway here is that these progressive renovation trajectories and minimum energy performance standards will be a bigger impulse to actually start renovating the buildings and to increase the renovation rates. Then there are several articles on energy performance certificates, specifically Article 19 is important here. So energy performance certificates are the certificates recognized at member state or by a legal person designated by it, which indicates the energy performance of a building or building unit calculated in accordance with the methodology adopted pursuant to Article 4. And that's about the energy performance of buildings. Good to know. Better defined design guidelines to improve the readability are being provided. Sometimes it was not clear, so the Commission and the institutions have recognized this and now foresee that it should be improved. And member states also need to ensure common visual identity of these certificates. EPCs will be done through an on-site visit, though this can happen by virtual means. Now that's clearly a compromise, a political compromise in the text. So it will be up to member states to define what that means. And I guess also here the Commission will come with recommendations. New recommendations will include information on cost and benefits. And the new EPCs have a link to advisory services, such as the one-stop shops. But that's another example of the integratedness of different information tools. Improved data scope that includes better energy performance coverage and GH3 metrics. That shows that EPCs, just like building renovation passports, will also collect different types of information. And when data on global warming potential and life cycle impact of buildings become available, that should be included on the EPCs. The
Rutger,
EPC
sorry to
lifespan.
interrupt, just to ask you to be conscious about time.
The time,
as we're
yes.
moving
Okay.
forward.
Thank you, Dragomir. Cool. Then I will shortly touch upon the EED and then summarize everything. So we talked about the EPBD now. There's another directive that I shortly want to touch upon because there are specific aspects on the exemplary role of the public sector here. So there's one article specifically, like a chapter focusing on the exemplary role of the public sector. Relevant here are Article 5 and 6, public sector leading on energy efficiency and the exemplary role of public buildings. This says basically that member states shall ensure that the total final energy consumption of all public bodies combined is reduced with 1.9% each year compared to 2021. And the member states shall ensure that at least 3% of the total floor area heated and cooled buildings is renovated each year to at least NZEP or ZEP. Takeaway, basically public authorities have extra responsibilities, but also an opportunity to lead the way and to show that renovations of these buildings and energy savings are possible. And building renovation passports and IB Road to EPC are very useful tools for for public authorities to achieve these the responsibilities for these articles. Then there are other ways in which energy efficiency can be achieved. So there's energy saving obligations. beyond public authorities, and there is energy efficiency obligation schemes for specific actors in the energy sector on national level. I will skip this right now in light of the time. And I come to my conclusion. And the conclusion is basically that the EPBD recast provides a framework that can be used to craft effective and integrated building renovation passports and to decarbonize buildings. But this effective transposition in the coming 2 years is essential to reap the benefits. And there's opportunities for IBRO to EPC in the transposition, specifically because public bodies should lead on energy efficiency in context of the EED and have an exemplary role by renovating the public buildings. So IBRO to EPC and other building renovation passport schemes can really help to guide public authorities on which measures to take. All member states must implement voluntary building renovation passport schemes also for other buildings. There's a link between EPCs and BRPs, and they should also be linked to other tools like one-stop shops and digital building logbooks. And BRPs could be linked to financing tools to support compliance with, for example, minimum energy performance standards and the renovation trajectories. Now, what are attention points? Building renovation passports should be based on on-site visits. It's important. And obviously, high quality of these tools is essential in order to make them useful. And we might consider the need for capacity building in order to make sure that experts are able to draft up building renovation passports. Thank you very much for your attention, and excuse me for taking too much time.
Thank you very much, Rutger. Indeed, very broad topic, and it's difficult to pack it up in 15 minutes only. I've experienced that
Was
too
a
myself.
challenge, yes.
Yes, but I'm very happy that you answered my question, and it was how the public authorities are affected by these changes. Indeed, they have to take the exemplary role. And here I would like to take the question that came through the question answers interface. By the way, just for every participants in the webinar, please go ahead and ask your questions using the Q&A box in your Zoom clients. That's the only way we can take questions, and I'll be happy to transfer them to our speakers. And Rutger is only with us until 11 or so we can use the occasion to shoot him with all our pending issues, and I know that they're not few. So the question that came through the Q&A is what we can do as ambitious local administration so that we actually provide the quality, the one thing that Rutger completed his presentations with, and go beyond the minimum national requirements. Do we have good examples, good practices from the local authorities that we can spread over? And I hope that you would excuse me for expanding a little bit on that. Can we also tackle the problem of underperformance? Does the EPBD brings us tools to, eliminate the risk of underperformance, which we have seen, unfortunately, quite a lot recently? So, Rutger, that's the question to you.
Yes, thank you for this question. I think it really touches upon an essential point. So basically, the EPBD provides options to member states, right? So when we're looking at the builder renovation passports as an example, we see that there is a voluntary, that all member states must implement it, but it's voluntary for use unless member states want to make it obligatory. So this shows that there is leeway for member states to in such moments say, okay, we are going to develop a very good building renovation passport scheme and we make it obligatory to get access to funding, to make it obligatory for specific types of buildings, for example, large buildings, or for public buildings, or for specific use buildings like hospitals or schools. So there are ways for member states to go ahead. It's really a framework, and this is an opportunity and a risk, because obviously if member states are not motivated, they might also say, well, we keep it voluntary and we do not invest a lot of effort in it. But on the other hand, if member states really want to go ahead, they can. Are there any good examples? I think there are good examples. I think IB Road, for example, is a project that shows, IB Road to EPC is a project that shows on different national implementation levels how this can be done with different types of modules. But there are also other projects. For example, I work on a Renoculi project where we're also piloting building renovation passports in different countries, including Bulgaria, Romania, and Slovakia. We will publish a report this week on the topic. So I believe there are many good examples. And on top of that, the European Commission is currently, as I previously mentioned, working on a guidance in which they will also highlight examples to show member states what they can do. And Dragomir, you mentioned also the topic of underperformance. I just wanted to specify, do you mean the underperformance of renovations, or do you mean in general underperformance of the
Yes,
renovation?
precisely. The underperformance of renovation and the performance gaps that we see from designed performance through actual consumption of energy, which is an issue that we all have to acknowledge.
Yeah, you're very right. I have been having discussions with experts from my mother country, the Netherlands, on this topic for a long time already, and I think it's really essential because if we promise people certain savings, we create high expectations, and in the end, we do not deliver on those promises, people get disappointed, and that is a serious risk. When we're talking about solutions to this, well, there are different leeways. Actually, in 3 weeks, we're organizing a workshop on this topic in Berlin in collaboration with another project that is specifically looking at this challenge, the underperformance. Yeah, so this is a topic, it's on the agenda. I would say that the silver bullet is not there yet, but yeah, it's something we really need to acknowledge. And yeah, personally, I'm also more of the better under promise and overperform than the other way around.
Thank you very much. Indeed, that's an issue, and we'll be talking about that in the coming months together with Rutger and other colleagues in Berlin and around Europe. I hope that would be a discussion really that would attract a lot of stakeholders. There is a quick question, and I would like to take it as it comes from our good colleague and friend Nagme Altman. Is it clear if the BRP should be cost-free, or the member state should provide financing for making building renovation passports for the building councillors? I would just like to ask you for a short response, considering the amendments of the directives.
It's a very relevant question for, of course, all building owners. It's not said in the EPBD recast that BRP should be cost-free, but it is mentioned that member states should provide dedicated financing for deep renovations and stage renovations. So that implies that there should be some kind of support to ensure that these tools are available and affordable.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this intervention. Indeed, very informative. And I'm speeding up to the next speaker because we already are running out of time beyond the agenda and exhausted our time buffer at the end. So next speaker is my colleague Alexander Stankov. He'll be talking about deep energy renovation and step-by-step retrofitting approach. And Alexander is a project manager at EnEffect, specializing in sustainable building design, energy auditing, and renewable energy projects. He organized